Anne's world shatters when a mysterious illness strikes during her anniversary dinner. But when a compassionate stranger, Sarah, steps in to save her life, the two uncover dark secrets that send Anne's life into a tailspin. Determined to seek justice and find healing, Anne and Sarah embark on a courageous journey to build a safe haven for women facing their own battles. Together, they turn pain into purpose, creating a powerful legacy of hope and resilience. If you're inspired by stories of strength and friendship like this video, subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Now, join us as we dive into a tale of survival, transformation, and the power of true friendship. And Preston adjusted her napkin, her eyes tracing the elegant surroundings of Levantine Heights, a chic restaurant with high ceilings and quiet, understated decor. She took in the polished silverware, the low hum of intimate conversations around them, and the flickering candlelight casting shadows across the deep green walls. Tonight was supposed to be special, her anniversary with Mark, celebrating 2 decades together. But despite the serene atmosphere, she couldn't shake an unusual feeling, a gnawing unease she couldn't quite place. As she took a sip of her water, she noticed Mark watching her. His face, usually animated with charm and laughter, wore a peculiar look tonight, distant, almost rehearsed. He had been particularly quiet this evening, only offering the occasional polite smile or acknowledging nod. Something about it didn't feel right. "You look troubled, honey," Mark said suddenly, leaning across the table, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth. Anne blinked, startled. "Oh, I'm fine," she replied a bit too quickly. She straightened in her seat, forcing a small smile. "Just taking it all in, I guess. This place is beautiful." "Yes, it is," Mark agreed, glancing around. "Only the best for you," and studied him, searching his expression for the usual warmth. Mark had always been a master of charm. His business dealings often required him to sway others with nothing more than a smile and a well-placed compliment. But tonight, the charm felt hollow, almost forced. He met her gaze and held it, his dark eyes reflecting the candlelight. She wanted to believe everything was fine, that her sense of unease was just a product of overthinking. "You don't seem happy," Mark said, his tone feigned concern. "Is something wrong with the food?" And forced a chuckle, shaking her head. No, the food is great. I don't know. I feel like I'm being watched, somehow." She lowered her voice, her eyes darting around the restaurant. "Have you noticed anything strange tonight?" Mark's smile tightened just slightly. "You're just nervous and relax." He reached across the table and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. His fingers were cold, and his touch, though gentle, seemed to lack its usual warmth. And took a steadying breath, hoping to calm the twisting unease in her stomach. She tried to focus on the shrimp dish in front of her, but each bite felt like a struggle. The delicate flavors tasted off somehow, almost bitter, and her stomach churned with each mouthful. I think the shrimp isn't sitting well with me," she murmured, setting her fork down, her appetite fading. Mark's eyebrows rose slightly, and he nodded, signaling to a waiter with a small wave. "Maybe you need something else. Let me ask them to bring something more to your taste," he offered smoothly. The waiter arrived promptly, his expression attentive as Mark addressed him. "Please, bring some water and perhaps something light for my wife. She seems to be feeling a bit under the weather." The waiter nodded and disappeared, and Mark turned back to Anne, his gaze flickering with a hint of impatience. "See? We'll have you feeling better in no time." And tried to smile, but her unease only grew. As the minutes passed, a strange dizziness settled over her, and her vision blurred slightly around the edges. She gripped the edge of the table, her heart pounding erratically. "Mark, I really don't feel well," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mark's expression shifted, but not to the concern she had hoped for. He looked calculating, as though he were considering his next move. "It's just a mild reaction," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Let's just wait for the waiter to bring some water. You'll feel better soon." Anne's heart rate quickened as her hands started to feel numb. She tried to focus on her breathing, but each breath seemed to come in shallow gasps. "This isn't just an upset stomach," she managed, her voice trembling. Something is wrong." At that moment, The waiter returned with a glass of water and a small packet of antacids. He placed them on the table, his expression a mix of professionalism and genuine concern. "Ma'am, do you need anything else?" he asked, glancing nervously between Anne and Mark. "Yes," Mark said quickly, his tone sharp. "Perhaps something for nausea?" "Right away, sir," the waiter replied, moving briskly back toward the kitchen. As the waiter left, and felt her vision blur further, her surroundings fading in and out, Mark's face seemed to flicker in and out of focus, his features shifting between sharpness and shadow. "Stay with me," and Mark said, his voice low, almost a whisper. He reached across the table, holding her hand tightly, his grip firm but not reassuring. His eyes held hers, but the emotion she saw there was not concern. It was something else entirely, something colder, more calculated. "Mark, why?" she managed to whisper before everything around her faded to black. Anne's world was a swirl of muted sounds and blinding lights. She felt herself being lifted, her body weightless as hands guided her to a softer surface. Voices came and went, urgent and worried, but she couldn't focus enough to make sense of them. Every sound felt like it was underwater, distant and distorted. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" a voice asked, soft yet insistent. She tried to respond, but her throat felt dry, her words lodged somewhere between her mind and her mouth. Faintly, she felt someone pressing something cool against her lips, a pill, maybe, or water. She struggled to swallow, her throat feeling raw, her mind hazy and filled with static. Gradually, the sounds became clearer. She felt someone lifting her wrist, a gentle press as they checked her pulse. The sensation was strange, surreal, like she was floating outside of herself. "She ate shrimp, right?" a voice asked. It sounded familiar, concerned. "Yes, but she's not allergic," another voice replied, Mark's voice, tinged with something unreadable. She tried to open her eyes, to see his face, but the light was too bright, searing through her eyelids. "She's going to need more help than we can provide here," someone said firmly. "We need an ambulance immediately." Mark's voice was calm but firm. "Yes, of course. Do whatever you need." In the haze, and felt a surge of fear. Why didn't he sound more worried? She tried to reach out, but her limbs felt heavy, pinned down by some invisible weight. "Hold on, ma'am," the first voice said again, and she felt a strange warmth, the sensation of hands holding hers. It felt grounding, like an anchor in the midst of the chaos swirling around her. She drifted in and out of awareness, catching fragments of conversation, possible allergic reaction, blood pressure dropping, pulses weak. Each word floated around her like a puzzle piece, but she couldn't put them together. The weight pressing down on her chest grew heavier, her breath shallow and uneven. Then, as if from nowhere, she felt another presence nearby. A woman's voice, soft yet commanding, cut through the static. "Wait," the voice said. "I think I know what's happening here." The urgency in the woman's tone seemed to spark something in Anne. She tried to focus, to cling to the voice, to hold on to anything that could pull her back from the darkness. The bright, sterile lights of the emergency room flickered as a figure quietly slipped in through the side door. Sarah Monroe, a member of the hospital's cleaning staff, had been passing by when she saw the commotion around Anne's arrival. She'd always been invisible to the busy doctors and nurses, just the quiet, unassuming woman who swept floors and emptied bins. But tonight, something about the scene pulled her in. Sarah watched with growing concern as the doctors hovered around Anne, who lay pale and barely conscious on the stretcher. She noted Anne's labored breathing, her pale skin, the way her eyes fluttered open only to close again in weakness. One of the young doctors looked up, shaking his head. "She's not responding to the treatment. We've tried epinephrine. She's still going downhill." Sarah's instincts screamed at her. She had seen symptoms like this before. Growing up in a family of herbalists, she had helped her mother and grandmother tend to villagers struck down by everything from food poisoning to mysterious illnesses. Sometimes the conventional treatments failed, and it was an old family remedy that made the difference. She kept some of those remedies with her even after moving to the city, tucked away just in case. Before she could talk herself out of it, Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady despite the authority around her. "Excuse me, I think I might have something that can help." The doctor nearest to her turned, frowning. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area. Please leave." Sarah stood her ground, lifting a small vial she'd carried in her cleaning cart. "I know this sounds unusual, but I've seen symptoms like these before. This is an antidote we've used in my community for certain kinds of poisoning." One of the senior doctors, a man with graying hair and a patient look, hesitated, his gaze flickering between Sarah and Anne's failing vitals. "We don't have time," he murmured, glancing at the monitor as Anne's blood pressure continued to plummet. The other doctors exchanged skeptical looks, but the senior doctor's expression softened, desperation overtaking protocol. He nodded to Sarah. "Do it." Sarah approached Anne's side, her hand surprisingly steady as she unscrewed the vial. She poured a small amount into a syringe and administered it carefully into Anne's fore, whispering a quick prayer under her breath. Seconds passed, and the room held its collective breath. Slowly, Anne's breathing steadied. Her face, still ghostly pale, seemed to regain a hint of color. The numbers on the monitor improved, her heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation, each shifting incrementally toward stability. The doctors let out quiet sighs of relief, but one of the younger nurses glared at Sarah. "You took a big risk. That could have gone very differently." Sarah nodded, her gaze steady but soft. "I know, but I couldn't just stand by." The senior doctor placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a small nod of gratitude. But before he could say anything, the head administrator entered the room, his face a mask of sternness. "Ms. Monroe, I need to speak with you." "Now," he said, his voice clipped. Sarah's stomach tightened. She had expected there would be consequences, but seeing Anne's stabilized vitals gave her some peace. She followed the administrator into the hallway, casting one last glance back at Anne, who lay breathing steadily, her hand curling weakly into the blanket as she began to stir. The administrator's office was cold, a stark contrast to the buzzing warmth of the ER. Sarah sat on the other side of the large mahogany desk, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The administrator, Mr. Hughes, fixed her with a stony glare as he closed the door. "Ms. Monroe," he began, his voice laced with disapproval, "your actions tonight were extremely reckless. You are not a doctor. You had no right to intervene." Sarah swallowed, choosing her words carefully. "Sir, I understand your concerns, but I recognized her symptoms. I've seen it before, and I knew that what I had might help." Mr. Hughes shook his head. "We have rules and protocols for a reason. What you did could have caused more harm than good." Sarah's gaze dropped to her hands. "I understand, sir, but I couldn't just watch her die. I knew there was a chance it could help." He sighed, a hint of frustration crossing his face. "I respect your intentions, Ms. Monroe, but we cannot have hospital staff, especially non-medical personnel, administering unknown substances. I'm afraid we have no choice but to let you go. You're dismissed from your duties effective immediately." Sarah felt the weight of his words settle heavily on her. She had risked everything, and now her only source of income, her work in this very hospital, was slipping away. "I understand," she murmured, her voice steady despite the knot of fear building in her stomach. Mr. Hughes's expression softened slightly. "You're a good person, Sarah, and I do believe you meant well. But the hospital can't afford risks like this." She nodded, forcing a small smile. "Thank you, sir." As she left the office, Sarah felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. She knew she had done the right thing. She had saved a life. Yet the uncertainty of what came next loomed large in her mind. Without this job, her future was murky, and the city felt more unwelcoming than ever. Outside the hospital, Sarah paused, breathing in the cool night air. Her hands shook slightly as the reality of her situation settled in. She had no job, no security. But even as fear crept in, she couldn't shake the feeling that and was in danger, perhaps more than anyone realized. It had been something in Mark's expression, a barely perceptible flicker of emotion that had struck Sarah as unusual. The cold detachment in his eyes, his barely concealed impatience when Anne had struggled, the way he hadn't looked quite surprised. Driven by intuition, Sarah returned to her small apartment, and began to dig through whatever public information she could find about Mark Preston. She learned that he was a successful investment broker, a man of considerable wealth and influence. His professional life was spotless, but something about his recent financial dealings made her pause. She found a legal notice about a recent business deal gone wrong, something that hinted at money issues. The more she read, the more she felt she was uncovering a carefully crafted facade. Mark's calmness in the face of Anne's crisis and the subtle hints of financial instability pointed to a troubling possibility. Could he have orchestrated something to harm his own wife? As Sarah's mind spun with questions, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. She picked it up, her heart racing when she saw the hospital's number flash on the screen. "Hello," she answered, her voice steadying. "Ms. Monroe, it's Dr. Evers. I wanted to inform you that Ms. Preston has stabilized. Whatever you gave her seems to have had a positive effect." Sarah let out a breath of relief. "Thank you, doctor. That's good to hear." The doctor hesitated. "Listen, Sarah, I know the administration's decision must be difficult, but I want you to know that what you did, it was brave. Risky, yes, but brave." "Thank you, Dr. Evers. I appreciate that," Sarah replied, touched by his words. She hesitated before adding, "Do you think Miss Preston will be safe?" Dr. Evers paused, his tone shifting. "What do you mean?" "Just a feeling," Sarah said cautiously, realizing how speculative it sounded. "It's probably nothing." But even as she said it, the uneasy feeling in her chest didn't lessen. She thanked Dr. Evers again and hung up, her mind racing with possibilities. She couldn't shake the sense that Anne's life was still in danger. With renewed resolve, Sarah gathered her things. She would reach out to Anne, and she would tell her everything. Anne's room was quiet, sunlight spilling through the partially closed blinds in gentle rays. She sat propped up in bed, a blanket pulled tightly around her shoulders, her gaze distant. She was still weak from her recent collapse, and though she was grateful to be recovering, her mind was plagued by questions she couldn't answer. Why had she felt so certain of Mark's gaze on her before everything went dark? Why had he looked so indifferent? There was a soft knock at her door, startling her from her thoughts. She expected a nurse, but instead saw a familiar face. Sarah Monroe stepped into the room cautiously, her eyes kind but tinged with concern. "Miss Preston, I hope I'm not intruding," Sarah said softly. "I wanted to see how you were doing," and smiled weakly, the memories of the night feeling like a distant, fevered dream. "Sarah, I don't know how to thank you. They told me what you did. If it weren't for you, I might not be here." Sarah took a step closer, her expression shifting from relief to determination. "Miss Preston, I'm just glad you're okay. But I came here because I'm worried about you." Anne's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "I need to ask you something, and I hope you won't think I'm overstepping," Sarah said, sitting in the chair by Anne's bedside. "Do you remember anything from that night? Anything unusual about the way you felt? Or how Mark behaved?" And frowned, the memories cloudy but unsettling. "I remember feeling nervous, even before I felt sick. I thought Mark seemed distant. And when I started to feel worse, I looked at him, and I thought he seemed almost relieved." Sarah's gaze held Anne's, her expression resolute. "I know this might sound strange, but I think someone may have tried to harm you, Miss Preston." Anne's hand tightened around the blanket. "But why would anyone want to do that?" Sarah took a steadying breath, choosing her words carefully. "I did some research after what happened. I learned that Mark's business has been struggling financially. He has a lot of debts. I don't want to alarm you, but it's possible that Mark may have had a reason to see you out of the picture." Anne's face paled as the weight of Sarah's words settled over her. It sounded impossible, unthinkable. And yet, deep down, she knew Sarah's suspicions weren't entirely without basis. She had felt something that night, something that had made her uneasy, something she hadn't wanted to admit. But he's my husband," she stammered, her voice trembling. "We've been together for years." Sarah placed a gentle hand on Anne's arm. "I know it's hard to believe, but if there's even a chance that I'm right, then you need to be careful. You don't have to decide what to do now, but please consider getting somewhere safe. I can help you." Anne's mind spun as the implications sank in. If Sarah was right, then Mark wasn't the man she thought she knew. But how could she leave her life behind, based on a suspicion? She wanted to believe it wasn't true, that Mark couldn't be capable of something so heinous. And yet, the memory of his calm, almost clinical expression lingered in her mind. She couldn't ignore the chill it sent down her spine. "All right, Sarah," she said softly. "I don't know what to believe, but I trust you. If you think I'm in danger, I'll let you help me." And then Sarah sat in Sarah's small living room, the dim light casting long shadows on the walls. The room was modest, filled with mismatched furniture and soft, faded rugs that gave it a cozy, well-loved feel. It was a world away from the cold opulence of Anne's life with Mark. For the first time in days, Anne felt a sense of safety, of warmth that her home no longer offered. "We have to be careful," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "If Mark suspects that you're onto him, he may try to stop you." Anne nodded, her heart pounding. It felt surreal to be planning an escape from her own husband, a man she had once trusted implicitly. But every time she tried to push the doubts away, Sarah's words echoed in her mind, bringing back flashes of Mark's strange behavior. "Do you think he'll notice I'm gone?" Anne asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "He might," Sarah replied, glancing out the window as if expecting someone to be watching. "But we'll leave a note saying you've gone to visit an old friend. Something that sounds like you just needed time away." And nodded, trying to hold on to a semblance of calm. "All right, I'll pack a small bag tonight. Just the essentials." They worked quietly, each step calculated to avoid drawing attention, and packed only a few clothes and some personal belongings, leaving her phone behind to avoid any way for Mark to trace her. Early the next morning, Sarah drove her small, inconspicuous sedan to Anne's house. The neighborhood was still dark, streetlights casting faint glows across the driveways, and slipped out of the house silently, her bag slung over her shoulder, her heart pounding as she locked the door behind her. She left the note on the counter, a neatly written lie about needing a few days to clear her head. The drive back to Sarah's was silent, both women lost in their thoughts. It wasn't until they reached Sarah's house that Anne let out the breath she'd been holding, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. "You're safe now," Sarah reassured her as they settled back into the quiet sanctuary of her home. And nodded, trying to believe it. But as she looked around the unfamiliar room, the reality of her situation weighed heavily on her. She had left behind everything she had known, and the man she had once loved was now a shadow, a stranger. Over the next few days, Anne settled into the modest safety of Sarah's home. She had little contact with the outside world, relying on Sarah to keep her updated on any developments. It was a strange feeling, this quiet retreat away from the city, a place where she could gather her thoughts and slowly come to terms with the suspicions that had shattered her life. In the afternoons, as sunlight streamed through the small kitchen window, she and Sarah would sit together over cups of tea, sharing stories from their pasts. Sarah spoke of her family's herbal knowledge, the generations of women who had passed down remedies for everything from colds to life-threatening illnesses. "You really saved me," Anne murmured one afternoon, her fingers wrapped around a warm mug. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Sarah offered a small, comforting smile. "You don't need to repay me, Anne. Sometimes we just need someone who sees us, who believes in us when no one else does." Anne's eyes softened, gratitude swelling in her chest. In the quiet moments they shared, she felt a connection with Sarah that she hadn't felt in years with Mark. Here, there was no pretense, no hidden agendas, just two women finding solace in each other's company. But despite the peace, Anne's mind was never fully at rest. At night, when the house was dark and silent, the questions haunted her. Why had Mark changed? Was it her? Had she missed the signs? Sarah was the first to pick up on Anne's growing need for answers. One morning, as they sat in the kitchen, she reached across the table, placing a gentle hand on Anne's. "Do you want to know what I found?" she asked softly, and looked at her, eyes wide. "You've found something?" Sarah nodded, her face somber. "I've been doing some digging. There's a woman named Karen Matthews. She works with Mark. From what I've seen, they've had more than just a professional relationship, and she's been linked to some questionable practices in the past." The revelation hit, and like a punch to the gut, She had suspected Mark's behavior was motivated by money, but hearing about Karen felt like another betrayal. Karen, and whispered, the name tasting bitter on her tongue. I knew he had a close colleague, but I never thought. Sarah squeezed her hand gently. I'm going to get more information, but I wanted you to know. You deserve the truth. And nodded, feeling a strange mixture of pain and relief. The betrayal cut deep, but at least now, she was beginning to understand. She had a name, a face, a direction to channel her anger and grief. Sarah carefully crafted her plan to investigate Karen Matthews. She borrowed a nondescript blazer from a friend and entered Mark's company headquarters under the guise of a consultant doing an internal survey on employee satisfaction. It was an easy cover that gave her access to the building without raising suspicions. Navigating the labyrinthine office, Sarah managed to locate Karen's office and peek through the frosted glass. Karen sat at her desk, animated, gesturing as she spoke to a colleague. Even from a distance, Sarah could sense the competitive edge in her demeanor. When Karen's meeting concluded, Sarah approached her office, knocking gently on the door. Karen looked up, surprised but polite. Yes. Hello, Ms. Matthews, Sarah greeted, her voice professional. I'm conducting a workplace culture survey, part of a consulting project for the company. Do you have a few minutes? Karen eyed her curiously but nodded, gesturing for Sarah to sit. Sure, I suppose I can spare a few. They engaged in small talk about workplace culture, the pressures of high competition, and the need for productivity. Sarah noted Karen's poised answers, her careful words, and the almost rehearsed responses. This wasn't a woman who let her guard down easily. After a few moments, Sarah shifted her tone, her expression growing more earnest. How do you handle competition, Ms. Matthews? It must be tough trying to balance ambition with fairness. Karen laughed lightly, leaning back in her chair. Oh, I'm sure every workplace has its share of ambition, but I believe in playing fair. I may be driven, but I'd never compromise my integrity. Sarah nodded, keeping her face neutral. Yet something in Karen's smooth responses didn't sit right. It was as if Karen's words had been carefully crafted, designed to project an image without revealing anything genuine. Thank you, Ms. Matthews, Sarah said, standing to leave. I appreciate your time. As she exited the building, Sarah's thoughts churned. Karen's responses had been flawless, too flawless, in fact. Sarah felt certain she was hiding something. But one thing was clear. She needed to dig deeper to uncover the truth. Back in Sarah's cozy living room, the soft morning light filtered through the curtains as she and huddled over coffee, discussing the strange conversation with Karen. I can't shake the feeling that she's hiding something, Sarah murmured, sipping her coffee. Karen may have kept her answers neutral, but there was something about her demeanor, too controlled, too perfect, and nodded, her fingers tightening around the coffee mug. Karen was never really a friend, you know. She always seemed more interested in Mark than in anything I had to say. I can't believe I never saw it before. Sarah studied Anne's face, seeing both hurt and resilience there. Are you ready to take this further, Anne? We may need to confront Mark directly. The question hung heavy between them, and Anne took a deep, steadying breath. I don't want to be afraid of him anymore. I need to know the truth. If he's guilty, I want him to face justice. They spent the next few hours planning how best to confront Mark. Sarah knew they couldn't go to the police yet. They had no concrete evidence. But if they could catch him off guard, perhaps he would reveal something in a moment of arrogance or anger. They crafted a plan, simple yet risky. Sarah would confront Mark under the guise of clearing things up and hope to extract a confession, and would wait nearby, listening in to whatever he admitted. Later that afternoon, Sarah found herself outside a small, upscale cafe near Mark's office. She had arranged to meet him here, feigning concern for misunderstandings that had arisen regarding Anne's sudden disappearance. Mark had sounded wary on the phone but agreed to meet, his tone cool and detached. Mark arrived a few minutes late, looking polished and as calm as ever. He greeted Sarah with a nod and settled into the chair across from her, his expression inscrutable. So, he began, folding his hands on the table. You said you wanted to clear things up. I'm here. Let's clear them up. Sarah took a steadying breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Mark, I know you, and we're having issues. and I know that her sudden illness raised some eyebrows. I just thought, as her friend, that I should understand what happened. Mark's eyes narrowed, but he gave her a measured smile. Issues? And I were fine. She's just going through a bit of a rough patch. Nothing more. I'm taking care of her. She thought she was being poisoned, Mark, Sarah replied, her tone even but probing. Don't you find it odd that she felt fine until that night at dinner? Mark's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly, shrugging nonchalantly. Sometimes people just get sick, Sarah. Stress, maybe? Or perhaps she was allergic to something in the food. But she's not allergic to shrimp, Mark, Sarah pressed, watching his expression closely. For the first time, a flash of irritation crossed his face, and his calm demeanor slipped just slightly. What exactly are you implying? Sarah held his gaze, her heart pounding. I think you know exactly what I'm implying, Mark. You're in debt, aren't you? That business deal you bragged about last year. It didn't work out, did it? Mark's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming on the table, and doesn't understand the pressures I face. She lives in her little world of privilege, oblivious to what it takes to keep it all going. But that doesn't mean I'd harm her. Sarah leaned forward, her voice low and steady. Are you sure about that? Because if there's even a chance you're responsible, I'll make sure you're held accountable. Mark let out a small, bitter laugh, his eyes narrowing with contempt. You're overstepping, Sarah. Anne's disappearance, her little episode, it's none of your business. And if you think you can come in here and accuse me of something, you're mistaken. Sarah felt a surge of frustration, but she kept her voice calm. You say that, but I see right through you, Mark, and deserves the truth. And if you're hiding anything, we'll find it out. Mark's expression turned cold, and for a moment, Sarah saw a flicker of something darker in his eyes. Good luck, Sarah, but you won't find anything. He stood abruptly, throwing a few bills onto the table before walking out, leaving Sarah with a mixture of anger and fear. She watched him go, her mind racing with possibilities. Although Mark hadn't admitted to anything outright, his evasive, defensive behavior told her she was close to the truth. She quickly sent a message to Anne, letting her know what had happened. Sarah and Anne sat in the waiting room at the local police station, the sterile, unwelcoming atmosphere pressing down on them. After the confrontation with Mark, Sarah had convinced Anne that it was time to go to the authorities. They had nothing conclusive, but Sarah hoped that their suspicions, combined with Mark's financial troubles, would prompt the police to look into his actions. A young officer approached them, his expression kind but cautious. Ms. Preston, Ms. Monroe, he greeted them, motioning for them to follow him into a small interview room. I understand you have some concerns about Mr. Preston? And took a deep breath, clutching Sarah's hand for support. Yes, she replied, her voice wavering but resolute. I think my husband may have been trying to harm me. The officer nodded, taking notes. I need you to walk me through everything that happened, your symptoms, any unusual behavior from your husband, and why you believe he would want to harm you. And recounted the events of the past few weeks. Her sudden illness, Mark's indifferent response, the financial troubles he had kept hidden, and Sarah's suspicions based on their research. The officer listened intently, asking clarifying questions, but keeping his expression neutral. When they finished, he closed his notebook, his face thoughtful. This is quite serious. We'll need to investigate these claims further, but your story gives us cause to begin a preliminary investigation. And felt a mixture of relief and dread as they left the station. While she was grateful to have taken this step, the reality of the situation weighed heavily on her. She was accusing her husband of something heinous, and she knew that the consequences would be severe, both for her marriage and for her peace of mind. A few days later, Anne sat alone in Sarah's living room, flipping through an old photo album. She looked at pictures of herself and Mark from years past, vacations, family gatherings, birthdays. She barely recognized the man in those photos anymore, the man she thought she knew. Her thoughts were interrupted by the buzzing of Sarah's phone on the table nearby. Sarah walked in from the kitchen, glancing at the screen before her face fell. And it's Mark. He's been calling. I don't know how he got this number. Anne's stomach twisted with anxiety, but she managed a shaky nod. Well, what does he want? Sarah opened the message, her face darkening as she read. It's not good. He's threatening us, and he says we're going to regret taking this to the police. and felt a shiver run down her spine. Despite everything, she hadn't expected him to retaliate so openly. Fear mixed with anger, and she looked at Sarah, her eyes filled with determination. "I can't let him scare me, Sarah," and said firmly. "He's trying to make me doubt myself, make me feel powerless. But I can't go back. Not now." Sarah placed a comforting hand on Anne's shoulder. "You don't have to face him alone. I'll be here every step of the way." The threats continued sporadically over the following days. Cryptic messages, subtle intimidation tactics. But each time, Sarah and Anne faced them together, refusing to be cowed by Mark's attempts to manipulate and control. Their friendship grew stronger as they weathered each wave of anxiety, drawing strength from each other and the shared resolve to see justice served. The threats from Mark continued to weigh heavily on Anne. Each message seemed designed to remind her of how deeply he could affect her life, even from afar. As she glanced at her phone, still haunted by his last ominous text, she knew it was time to escape him for good. Not just physically, but emotionally. It was time to rebuild her life, starting with her safety and her future. Sarah, as always, was by her side, offering unwavering support. And it's time to take back control. If you're ready, let's plan to confront him in a way that will let you move on, once and for all. And nodded, determination growing stronger with each passing second. She had spent years living in Mark's shadow, doubting herself, and letting his control over her dictate every step. Now, the thought of breaking free, of having her own voice, was the only thing keeping her from succumbing to fear. Their plan was simple yet risky. They would arrange a meeting with Mark, carefully recording their conversation in the hopes that he would let something slip. Sarah would be there, ready to support, but also documenting everything in case he tried to deny his actions later. The next evening, they set their plan in motion. Sarah helped and prepare for the confrontation, coaching her on what to say and how to stay calm, and practiced her words, focusing on the anger and betrayal she felt rather than the fear that Mark had instilled in her for so long. They chose a quiet, public cafe for the meeting, knowing the bustling atmosphere would help them blend in while still feeling secure. Sarah waited nearby, out of sight but close enough to listen in, and sat at a corner table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her heart pounded as she waited, but the fear was quickly overtaken by a steely resolve. When she saw Mark walk in, dressed in his usual polished attire, her nerves nearly faltered. But Sarah's supportive gaze from across the room steadied her, and she held her head high as he approached. "And," Mark said smoothly, sliding into the seat across from her. His eyes held a glint of something dark, as though he knew he had the upper hand. "Thank you for coming, Mark," and began, keeping her voice calm measured. "We need to talk." Mark leaned back, crossing his arms. "So talk then. What is it you want to discuss?" And took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering. "I want to know the truth, Mark. About that night in the restaurant, about what happened to me. I want to know why you did this to me." Mark's expression hardened, his usual mask of charm slipping just a bit. "Why would you even think that? And you've always been so dramatic. Isn't it possible you just got sick?" "I know what you did," she said, her voice firmer now. "I may have been naive once, but I see things clearly now. You never loved me, did you? It was always about control, about money." Mark's jaw clenched, but he forced a laugh, though it lacked any genuine amusement. "I see Sarah's been filling your head with nonsense. You're right, I did what I had to do. But I didn't poison you. Whatever happened was just unfortunate." The admission, though veiled, made Anne's heart race. She felt the weight of Sarah's presence nearby, drawing courage from her friend's silent support. "Then explain it, Mark," and said, her voice gaining strength. "Explain why you weren't concerned when I was on the brink of dying. Explain why you didn't seem surprised." Mark leaned forward, his gaze cold and calculating. "And you always were too sentimental. All that mattered was getting ahead, and you were an inconvenience, a burden. I was only doing what was necessary." His words were a punch to the gut, each one more painful than the last. But as hurt as she felt, she knew this was the closure she needed. She wanted him to see that he no longer had power over her. "You're done, Mark," she said, her voice steady. I won't let you do this to me anymore. The police are already involved, and they're going to find out everything." A flicker of panic crossed Mark's face, but he quickly masked it with a dismissive sneer. "The police? You don't have any evidence. This is all in your head, and you'll never prove anything." "Maybe not," she replied, "but they'll dig. They'll find out about your debts, your lies, everything. And when they do, you'll have no one to blame but yourself." Mark's mask slipped entirely, and for the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak but thought better of it, glaring at her before storming out of the cafe, leaving her alone in the quiet aftermath. Sarah appeared moments later, her expression a mixture of pride and relief. "You did it, and he's going to slip up, and when he does, we'll be ready." The next few weeks passed in a blur as Anne and Sarah worked with the police, who had begun investigating Mark's finances and his involvement in Anne's illness. The tension was almost unbearable, but it felt lighter than she had in years. Each day that passed without Mark in her life brought a sense of liberation she hadn't known she needed. During this time, she also began the painful but necessary process of untangling herself from her marriage. With the help of a lawyer, she filed for divorce and began working to secure her finances, severing ties to the life she had once shared with Mark. Sarah, ever supportive, was there for every difficult conversation, every legal meeting, offering quiet encouragement and unyielding strength. Together, they were forging a path forward, one that was not bound by Mark's manipulative control. The police investigation revealed enough for the authorities to move forward with charges of attempted harm and fraud against Mark. The discovery of his financial schemes and evidence of his attempts to manipulate Anne's assets painted a dark picture that left little room for doubt. Mark was arrested, and the closure and so desperately sought began to feel tangible. Finally, Anne's divorce was finalized. The weight of her years with Mark lifted as she signed the papers, leaving his shadow behind for good. With her new freedom, Anne and Sarah decided to put their painful experiences towards something greater. They dreamed of opening a shelter, a place that could offer women like Anne a refuge, a community, and a new beginning. The idea became a passion project, each detail filled with purpose and hope. They named it Safe Harbor, a symbol of security and renewal. As the shelter's opening day approached, Anne felt a sense of peace and fulfillment she hadn't known was possible. Standing beside Sarah, she looked at the building they had worked so hard to create, each corner filled with the promise of safety and new starts. "This is what we needed all along," Sarah said, her voice filled with pride. "A place where women can find strength like we did," and nodded, tears of gratitude and triumph filling her eyes. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." Sarah smiled, her hand finding Anne's in a gesture of quiet solidarity. "You save yourself, Anne. I was just here to remind you of the strength you always had." Together, they cut the ribbon, officially opening Safe Harbor. The crowd cheered, and Anne felt the overwhelming love and support of the people around her. She was no longer the woman who had been broken by betrayal. She was a survivor, a beacon of hope, and a testament to the resilience that could be found in even the darkest of times. As Safe Harbor grew, so did Anne's confidence in herself and her ability to help others. She poured her experiences into the shelter, creating programs for emotional support, financial independence, and legal advocacy. Every woman who walked through Safe Harbor's doors received not only shelter, but a community that understood, cared, and believed in her strength. Sarah, too, became a foundational part of the shelter, using her knowledge of healing and her own experiences to support the women who arrived, often broken and afraid but ready for change. Months after its opening, Safe Harbor had become a place of transformation. And then Sarah sat on a bench in the garden, watching a group of women sharing laughter and stories nearby. It filled Anne's heart to see the sense of safety and trust that had blossomed here, something she had never imagined possible during the dark days with Mark. Looking around at the laughter and hope, she felt a profound sense of purpose. She was no longer alone. She had found a family, a community, and a sister in Sarah. As they watched the women under their care find strength, and knew that they were not only rebuilding their own lives. They were creating a legacy of resilience, one that would continue long after their own scars had healed. Safe Harbor's official grand opening was a celebration unlike any other. A large, white banner hung above the entrance of the refurbished Victorian house that now served as the shelter, reading, "Welcome to Safe Harbor." Volunteers, friends, and supporters from the community gathered outside, sharing in the warmth and excitement that filled the air, and looked around, feeling overwhelmed by the turnout. The faces around her, former colleagues, new friends, and women who had already begun rebuilding their lives at Safe Harbor, filled her with a sense of fulfillment she had never known. Beside her, Sarah stood with a small smile, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. Sarah's quiet presence had been her anchor throughout this journey, and couldn't imagine having done this without her. "Today isn't just a milestone," and said, addressing the crowd from a small podium near the entrance. "Today is the start of something much bigger. Safe Harbor is a place where women can feel seen, supported, and safe. This shelter represents a fresh start, a place where everyone can find a path forward." The crowd erupted in applause, and it caught the eye of a woman in the front row who had recently found sanctuary here. The woman's eyes shone with tears, and she offered in a small, grateful nod. It was a silent moment of understanding, a shared acknowledgement of the struggles they both had faced and the strength they had found within themselves, and stepped down from the podium, feeling lighter than she had in years. As she mingled with the crowd, thanking guests and accepting warm words of encouragement, she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. She turned to find a middle-aged man with kind eyes, a thoughtful smile on his face. "Hello," Andy said warmly. "I'm Adam. I'm on the board of a non-profit organization that works with shelters. I wanted to personally congratulate you on the success of Safe Harbor," and extended her hand, smiling. "Thank you, Adam. It means a lot to have community support. We wouldn't be here without it." As they spoke, and found herself drawn to his calm, respectful demeanor, Adam spoke passionately about his work and shared his admiration for the strength it took to start an organization like Safe Harbor. His empathy and genuine interest in the shelter's mission touched her deeply, for the first time in a long time, and felt the spark of a connection beyond friendship. When Adam left, he handed her a card, offering his help with anything she needed to expand the shelter's programs. She pocketed it, feeling a surprising sense of hope. It was a quiet promise of something new, a future filled with possibilities she hadn't dared to dream of before. As the event continued, and noticed Sarah standing off to the side, observing the celebration with a quiet satisfaction. Sarah's journey had been as transformative as Anne's, and as Anne walked over, she felt a wave of gratitude for the woman who had become not just a friend, but a sister. "Sarah," and began softly, "I can't thank you enough. This shelter, this community, none of it would exist without you." Sarah smiled, her eyes filled with emotion. "It wasn't just me, Anne. You found the courage to stand up and rebuild your life. I only reminded you of the strength you already had." As they shared this quiet moment, a tall man with sandy brown hair approached them, carrying a clipboard and looking slightly flustered. He introduced himself as Daniel, a social worker who had recently joined the shelter's volunteer team. Daniel explained that he had been helping coordinate the event but needed some guidance with a few last-minute details. Sarah immediately offered to help, her natural warmth and composure putting him at ease. As the two of them discussed the logistics, and couldn't help but notice the way Daniel seemed captivated by Sarah's calm presence. There was a subtle but unmistakable connection between them, a gentle spark that Anne recognized from her own conversation with Adam. As the evening wound down, Daniel found himself by Sarah's side once more, offering her a shy but sincere smile. "I know we just met, but it's rare to find someone as dedicated and compassionate as you are. If you ever need help around here, or if you just want to talk, I'd be honored." Sarah's cheeks flushed slightly, but she returned his smile, nodding. "I think I'd like that, Daniel." As night fell, the event concluded with a special ceremony, one Anne and Sarah had planned together to honor the journey each woman at Safe Harbor had traveled. Volunteers passed out small, floating paper lanterns, each carrying a tiny, flickering candle inside. Anne and Sarah stood side by side, each holding a lantern, looking out over the crowd of supporters, survivors, and allies. The night was calm, stars twinkling above, and a quiet anticipation filled the air. Anne stepped forward, addressing the crowd one last time. Tonight, these lanterns represent not just a memory, but a promise that no woman should have to face fear or doubt alone. Each of us has walked a difficult path, but together, we can create something beautiful. Each light here represents a story of resilience, a life that's overcome darkness. One by one, they released their lanterns, each delicate paper shell rising into the sky, a gentle light piercing the night. As the lanterns drifted higher, their soft glow filled the sky, a breathtaking display of hope and unity. And watched them float away, feeling the weight of her past lift with each passing light. Beside her, Sarah squeezed her hand, the two women united by a bond that went beyond friendship, beyond sisterhood. They were family now, tied together by the strength they had found in one another. The following months were transformative for Anne and Sarah. Safe Harbor quickly became a vital resource in the community, expanding its reach and creating new programs to empower women facing crises. Word spread, and more women found the courage to seek help, inspired by Anne and Sarah's story and the safe haven they had created. Anne and Adam began working together on several joint initiatives, blending their expertise to secure grants and fundraise for additional programs at Safe Harbor. Their professional collaboration blossomed into something deeper, and as they spent more time together, Anne found herself rediscovering feelings she hadn't thought possible: trust, companionship, and even love. Adam's unwavering respect and kindness helped her heal, teaching her that healthy love wasn't about control or power, but about mutual respect and growth. Sarah and Daniel's bond also deepened over time. Daniel's dedication to social work mirrored Sarah's compassion, and their shared values created a solid foundation for a relationship that was both personal and purposeful. Together, they expanded the shelter's outreach initiatives, offering workshops, counseling, and practical assistance to women in need. For the first time, Sarah allowed herself to envision a future filled with not only friendship, but also love and companionship. On the first anniversary of Safe Harbor's opening, Anne and Sarah stood side by side once more, watching as the new residents and volunteers bustled around the shelter. They had come a long way, not only as individuals, but as part of a thriving, supportive community. The shelter had helped dozens of women over the past year, each one finding safety and strength within its walls. That evening, as the staff, residents, and supporters gathered in the shelter's garden and took the stage, her heart full. "This shelter isn't just a building," she began, her voice carrying the weight of all she had learned. "It's a reminder that hope exists, that we can create change, and that no woman ever has to face her struggles alone. Together, we've built something that's bigger than any one of us, a home for those seeking refuge and a place to heal." Sarah joined her on stage, and the crowd applauded as the two women hugged, their friendship an inspiring symbol of resilience and recovery. Their journey from survivors to advocates had not only transformed their lives, but had also sparked a movement that extended far beyond Safe Harbor's walls. As the evening ended, Anne and Sarah lit a final candle, placing it in a small glass jar at the center of the garden. The candle's light illuminated their faces as they made a silent vow to continue their work, to fight for those who had yet to find their voices, and to carry forward the legacy they had built together. As they watched the candle burn, and turned to Sarah, smiling softly. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Sarah nodded, her own smile filled with pride. "And this is only the beginning." Together, they stood under the starlit sky, two women who had once faced the darkest of trials, now united in a shared purpose to create a brighter, safer world. A few months after Safe Harbor's one-year anniversary, the shelter continued to flourish, its impact rippling throughout the community. Local organizations and social workers often referred women to Safe Harbor, and the shelter became a safe and welcoming place for women in need. Anne and Sarah found themselves busier than ever, managing programs, coordinating volunteers, and expanding the shelter's resources. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ann and Sarah were preparing for a fundraising event, a gala that would help fund a new wing of the shelter dedicated to legal aid and career counseling. They had both poured themselves into the preparations, hoping to secure enough support to launch these essential services. Adam and Daniel joined them at the shelter, carrying boxes of decorations and equipment. The four of them had become a close-knit team, and their shared mission to support and uplift Safe Harbor's residents had only brought them closer. As Ann watched Adam unpack a box of flowers and table settings, she felt a warm, quiet contentment settle over her. She had found a partner in Adam, not only for her personal life, but also in her work, where they both shared the same vision. "Everything's looking great," Adam said, glancing around the room with a smile. "I think we're going to raise enough tonight to fund that new wing." Ann nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "I hope so. We're so close to making it happen, and I think this gala will bring in the final support we need." Sarah joined them, adjusting a centerpiece on one of the tables. "Tonight isn't just about the donations," she added. "It's about raising awareness too. Safe Harbor is still a relatively new organization, and there are so many people who don't know that this kind of resource exists." Daniel nodded in agreement, his expression thoughtful. "You're right. The more people know about us, the more support we'll get, and the more women we can help." As they worked together, the four of them shared a sense of purpose and camaraderie that went beyond friendship. Safe Harbor had brought them together, and in their partnership, they had found not only love, but also a sense of belonging and direction that each of them had needed. The gala was held in a spacious event hall, beautifully decorated with soft lighting, elegant floral arrangements, and small lanterns on each table to symbolize the light that Safe Harbor provided for its residents. Guests arrived in formal attire, mingling and enjoying the refreshments as they learned more about Safe Harbor's mission and the progress it had made over the past year. Ann and Sarah moved through the crowd, greeting donors, sharing stories of the women they had helped, and explaining their vision for Safe Harbor's future. Each conversation filled them with pride and a renewed sense of determination, as they saw how deeply others believed in their cause. Adam took the stage, introducing Ann and Sarah with heartfelt words about their dedication and resilience. He recounted their journey to create Safe Harbor, emphasizing the strength it took for both women to turn their own struggles into something that would change lives. And stepped up to the microphone, taking a deep breath as she gazed out over the sea of faces. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice steady and warm. "Safe Harbor isn't just a shelter. It's a place of hope, of renewal, and of possibility. Every woman who walks through our doors brings a story, and each story deserves to be honored, supported, and uplifted." Sarah joined her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Safe Harbor represents not only survival, but the transformation that follows it. We're here to help women rebuild, to help them discover their strengths, and to ensure that no one has to face these challenges alone." The crowd erupted in applause, and Ann felt tears prick her eyes as she looked over at Sarah, grateful for the friendship that had sustained her through her darkest days. As the evening continued, guests generously contributed to Safe Harbor, and by the end of the night, they had raised more than enough to fund the new wing. Ann and Sarah exchanged smiles, their excitement tempered by the humble knowledge of what this support would mean for the women who would benefit from these services. After the event wound down and the guests had departed, and Sarah, Adam, and Daniel lingered in the empty hall, basking in the success of the night. The weight of the past and the hard work they had poured into Safe Harbor felt lighter, and the future was brighter than ever. "We did it," Ann whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Sarah took her hand, her own eyes shining. "This is only the beginning." With the funds secured, construction on the new wing of Safe Harbor began immediately. Over the following months, Ann and Sarah worked closely with architects and designers, ensuring that every aspect of the space was tailored to the needs of the women they served. The new wing included private counseling rooms, a small legal office staffed with volunteer attorneys, and a computer lab where residents could access online resources and build skills for employment. Sarah, ever resourceful, expanded Safe Harbor's outreach programs, coordinating with local businesses to secure job training opportunities and internships for women ready to transition back into the workforce. The shelter had grown beyond what they had ever imagined, and Anne and Sarah's dedication was mirrored by the passionate team they had assembled around them. Adam and Daniel continued to support the shelter, each in his own way. Adam helped and secure additional grants, and together they organized workshops on financial independence and legal rights. Daniel, with his background in social work, led group counseling sessions and assisted with Safe Harbor's community outreach, ensuring that every woman felt heard, understood, and empowered. The new programs began making an immediate difference. Women who had once arrived at Safe Harbor with little hope were finding jobs, learning new skills, and building stable, independent lives. The shelter became a place of transformation, each success story reinforcing the impact of Anne and Sarah's work. One evening, as they closed up the shelter for the night, Anne and Sarah reflected on how far they had come. "I can't believe we've done all this," Anne said, her voice filled with wonder. "It's amazing to see the changes we're making in people's lives." Sarah smiled, her gaze thoughtful. "I think we were both meant to do this. Our experiences brought us here, and now we're able to give back in ways we never imagined." They walked through the quiet halls together, feeling a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. Safe Harbor was more than just a shelter now. It was a beacon of hope, a place where women could heal, grow, and reclaim their lives. Several years after the founding of Safe Harbor, Anne stood in the doorway of her modest, yet beautiful office within the shelter. The office was decorated with mementos from her journey, photographs of the early days, notes from women who had found support and healing, and reminders of the strength she had found in herself and others. Her relationship with Adam had blossomed, and they shared a life filled with purpose and love. Adam continued to support her work, and together they dreamed of expanding Safe Harbor's reach even further. Their shared vision, built on respect and admiration, was a stark contrast to the relationship she had once had with Mark. This was a partnership of equals, grounded in mutual understanding and genuine care. Sarah and Daniel had also become inseparable, their bond forged through the shared mission of helping others. They had recently married in a small ceremony attended by the close-knit Safe Harbor family. Their love was quiet, steadfast, and deeply fulfilling, a testament to the healing power of companionship built on trust and shared values. On Safe Harbor's 5th anniversary, Anne and Sarah hosted a reunion for former residents. The shelter's garden was filled with laughter, stories, and faces that had once been marked by fear, but were now filled with strength and joy. Women shared stories of their new lives, their jobs, their families, and their newfound freedom. The sense of resilience and hope was palpable, each story a testament to the impact of Safe Harbor. As the evening wore on, Anne and Sarah shared a quiet moment together, watching the celebration around them. They reflected on their journey, the pain they had endured, and the hope they had found in each other. "We've done something incredible," Anne said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "Safe Harbor is everything we dreamed it could be." Sarah nodded, her eyes misting over as she looked at Anne. "We took back our lives, and in doing so, we've helped others take back theirs. That's something no one can ever take away from us." The two women embraced, feeling the weight of their shared journey and the beauty of the life they had built. Together, they had transformed their pain into a legacy of hope, creating a place where others could find safety, strength, and a fresh start. As they looked out over the garden, filled with friends, families, and women they had helped along the way, and Sarah knew they had found their purpose. Safe Harbor was more than a shelter. It was a testament to resilience, a beacon for anyone who needed to remember that hope was always within reach. With the evening breeze stirring the lanterns strung across the garden, Anne and Sarah knew that their journey was far from over. They were ready to continue the work they had started, knowing that together, they could overcome anything. Their story was one of survival, sisterhood, and unbreakable strength, a reminder that even the darkest of nights could give way to the brightest of dawns. And as long as Safe Harbor stood, their legacy would continue to inspire and uplift, providing light to all who sought refuge within its walls. In the months following Safe Harbor's 5th anniversary celebration, the shelter's influence grew beyond what Ann and Sarah had ever imagined. The programs they had implemented, job training, legal aid, and counseling, had proven invaluable, and they now received inquiries from towns and cities all over the state, hoping to model similar programs for women in crisis. Ann and Sarah found themselves mentoring other communities, sharing their insights, and helping create safe harbor-inspired centers in other areas. One chilly winter evening, Ann and Sarah sat in the shelter's newly expanded office space, poring over paperwork for a grant application that could fund another shelter in a nearby city. Their goal was to help other communities create the same kind of support network they had developed at Safe Harbor, but it was a challenging task. Who would have thought we'd be here, building a network of shelters? And said with a tired but joyful laugh, "Sometimes I can hardly believe it." Sarah looked at her friend, eyes bright with pride. "We had a vision, and we held on to it, even when everything felt impossible. That's how we got here." As they worked, a young woman named Lily, a recent resident at Safe Harbor, knocked softly on the door. Lily had arrived at Safe Harbor several months prior, and in that short time, she had come out of her shell, taking advantage of the job training and counseling services. "Hey, Lily," and said, smiling warmly, "What can we do for you?" Lily stepped into the office, her gaze earnest. "I just wanted to say thank you. I don't think I'd be where I am now if it weren't for Safe Harbor. You both have no idea how much this place means to me." Ann and Sarah exchanged glances, moved by the young woman's gratitude. "I know what it feels like to start over," Sarah said, her voice soft. "It's not easy, but you're stronger than you know, Lily. And we're proud of everything you've accomplished." Lily hesitated, then continued, "I've been thinking, once I'm back on my feet completely, I'd love to come back and volunteer here. I want to give back, the way you've both given to me," and felt a wave of warmth and pride. Seeing women like Lily gain the confidence to move forward and give back to others was a beautiful testament to Safe Harbor's purpose. "We'd be honored, Lily. You're always welcome here." Lily left the office with a renewed sense of purpose, and Ann and Sarah watched her go, filled with a quiet satisfaction. Safe Harbor was more than just a shelter now. It was a community, a place where women found not only refuge, but also a purpose. Over the next few months, Ann and Sarah focused their energy on opening a second Safe Harbor location in a nearby city. They spent countless hours fundraising, meeting with potential donors, and working with local leaders to secure a suitable space. Their dream of reaching more women was closer than ever, and their excitement was palpable. Adam and Daniel were instrumental in the expansion efforts, offering their support wherever needed. Adam's skills as a negotiator helped secure donations and partnerships, while Daniel, with his social work expertise, guided the development of new programs to address the unique challenges that women in different communities faced. One afternoon, Ann and Adam took a quiet walk through the new building they had secured for the second location. The building was modest, but with a few renovations, it would provide the same safe, welcoming environment they had created at the original Safe Harbor. "I can't believe this is happening," Ann said, her voice filled with awe. "We're building something that will help so many women, something that will outlive us." Adam placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "That's the beauty of what you and Sarah have created. You're building a legacy of compassion and empowerment. It's something few people get to do in their lives." And smiled, feeling the gravity of his words settle over her. She knew the journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but she felt stronger and more purposeful than she had ever imagined possible. That evening, Ann, Sarah, Adam, and Daniel shared a quiet dinner together, reflecting on the progress they had made and the road ahead. They were not only colleagues but also family, bound by a shared vision and unwavering support for one another. Together, they toasted to the future of Safe Harbor and to the lives they hoped to impact for years to come. In the weeks leading up to the opening of the second Safe Harbor location, the team organized a soft launch, inviting local residents, social workers, and government officials to tour the facility. The event was a celebration of collaboration and the power of community, and it was a chance for Ann and Sarah to share their story with a new audience. As they walked through the rooms, filled with comfortable beds, warm lighting, and welcoming touches, and felt a swell of pride. This new safe harbor would be a sanctuary for women who needed a fresh start, a place where they could find strength and safety. At the end of the tour, Anne addressed the group, her voice steady and filled with conviction. Safe Harbor was built on a simple belief that every woman deserves a chance to rebuild her life. We know that strength doesn't come from isolation. It comes from community. And that's what we're creating here, a community of support, hope, and resilience. After the event, Anne and Sarah mingled with guests, answering questions and accepting words of support. Many people came forward, inspired by their vision and eager to get involved. A middle-aged woman approached them, her face lined with emotion. "I wish there had been something like this when I was younger," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "What you're doing here, it's a gift." And reached out, taking the woman's hand in hers. "We're here because of people like you. Your courage, your strength, that's what inspires us to keep going." The woman smiled, nodding in understanding. "Thank you, both of you. You're changing lives." As Safe Harbor's reputation grew, Anne and Sarah were invited to speak at conferences and events, sharing their story and encouraging others to support similar initiatives in their own communities. Their journey from victims to advocates had inspired thousands, and they began to see a ripple effect as more and more shelters and programs were established across the state. One evening, Anne and Sarah attended a national conference on women's empowerment, where they were invited to share the stage as keynote speakers. The crowd was filled with advocates, social workers, survivors, and community leaders, all gathered to support and uplift one another. Anne stepped up to the microphone, her heart pounding as she gazed out over the audience. She thought of all the women who had walked through Safe Harbor's doors, of the courage it took to leave behind a painful past and build a new life. Safe Harbor started as a dream, she began, her voice steady. It was a place we created out of necessity, a place where we could find hope and safety. And today, we're here to tell you that such places are possible in every community, that this work can be done, and that it's worth every challenge. Sarah joined her, adding her voice to the message of hope and resilience. Every woman deserves the chance to be heard, to be seen, and to rebuild her life on her own terms. We may all have different stories, but our strength is shared. Together, we can create the world we want to see. The audience erupted in applause, many wiping away tears, moved by their words. After the talk, dozens of people approached Anne and Sarah, sharing their own stories, expressing their admiration, and asking how they could help. As the conference ended, Anne and Sarah walked back to their hotel, both filled with gratitude and inspiration. They had found a way to transform their pain into something beautiful, and they had created a movement that would continue to grow long after they were gone. Years passed, and Safe Harbor's impact only deepened. The shelter had grown into a network of support centers across the state, each one modeled after Anne and Sarah's vision. Women from all walks of life found a safe haven in these shelters, a place to rebuild, to heal, and to reclaim their lives. Anne and Sarah continued to lead Safe Harbor, dedicating themselves to mentoring new staff and creating innovative programs. They had become pillars of strength and wisdom, known not only in their own community but across the country. On the 10th anniversary of Safe Harbor's founding, Anne and Sarah stood side by side, looking out over a crowd of supporters, former residents, and community leaders gathered in the shelter's garden. It was a moment of reflection, a time to honor the countless lives Safe Harbor had touched. As they shared a final embrace and whispered, "We did it, Sarah. We built something that will last." Sarah smiled, her eyes misting over. "We did, and we're not done yet." They released a final lantern into the night sky, its warm light a symbol of the hope and resilience they had nurtured in every woman who had come to Safe Harbor. As the lantern rose, carried by the gentle evening breeze, Anne and Sarah knew that their legacy would continue to shine, a beacon of strength and compassion for generations to come. As Safe Harbor's influence spread across the country, Anne and Sarah found themselves in an unexpected new role, mentors to the next generation of advocates and leaders. Young women, many of whom had once been residents at Safe Harbor, returned to take on leadership roles, eager to give back to the place that had changed their lives. They infused Safe Harbor with fresh energy and new ideas, building on Anne and Sarah's vision while expanding the shelter's impact. One such leader was Maya, a former resident who had joined the shelter years earlier after escaping a difficult relationship. During her time at Safe Harbor, Maya had blossomed, taking advantage of the job training and counseling programs to rebuild her life. Now, she had returned as the shelter's program director, dedicated to helping other women find the strength and resources she had once needed. And Sarah watched Maya with quiet pride as she led a team meeting one afternoon, discussing plans for a new initiative, a series of community workshops designed to educate young people about healthy relationships, consent, and self-advocacy. They knew that Safe Harbor's work was extending far beyond the walls of the shelter. It was reaching into schools, homes, and neighborhoods, creating a safer and more supportive environment for everyone. After the meeting, Maya approached them, her face lit with excitement. "I can't thank you enough for trusting me with this program. This work, it means everything to me. You've both been my role models, and I'm honored to carry this mission forward." And smiled, placing a hand on Maya's shoulder. "You're the perfect person for the job, Maya. You understand what Safe Harbor is about, and you bring so much passion and dedication to this work. We're so proud of you." Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with warmth. "You've come full circle, Maya. You're turning your experiences into something beautiful, and that's the greatest gift you can give." Maya hugged them both, and as she walked away, Sarah felt a profound sense of fulfillment. They had planted seeds of hope and resilience, and now they were watching those seeds grow and flourish in ways they had never anticipated. As Safe Harbor's model gained national attention, other communities reached out, eager to replicate its success. Anne and Sarah were invited to collaborate on a federal initiative to create more shelters and community resources nationwide. They traveled to Washington, D.C., where they met with policymakers and fellow advocates, sharing the insights and best practices they had developed over the years. The meetings were intense, filled with discussions about funding, resources, and legislation. But Anne and Sarah remained focused on their mission. They knew that these conversations were about more than policies. They were about saving lives, creating safe spaces, and giving women the tools to reclaim their independence. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings, Anne and Sarah sat on a bench overlooking the National Mall, taking in the quiet beauty of the city. Inside, a sense of awe and disbelief washing over her. "Can you believe we're here, shaping policies that could change the lives of women all over the country?" Sarah smiled, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes it feels surreal, but we've seen the impact of Safe Harbor firsthand. If we can help other communities build what we've built, then every challenge we've faced has been worth it." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sunset cast a warm glow over the city. In that quiet moment, they felt the weight of their work and the joy of knowing they were part of something far greater than themselves. As they returned to the conference the next morning, they felt invigorated, their vision sharpened, and their resolve unbreakable. They were not only advocating for change, they were creating a movement, one that would empower communities to support, uplift, and protect women in need. Years passed, and Anne and Sarah's live continued to evolve alongside Safe Harbor. The shelter's network had expanded to dozens of cities across the country, each location a testament to their work and dedication. They had become respected leaders in the field of women's advocacy, known for their compassion, resilience, and unwavering commitment to justice. One winter evening, as snow blanketed the streets outside Safe Harbor's original location, Anne and Sarah sat together in the cozy warmth of the shelter's common room. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft crackling of the fireplace, casting a warm glow over the photos and mementos adorning the walls. Photos of the shelter's founders, former residents, and volunteers filled the room, a visual history of the lives Safe Harbor had touched. As they reminisced and turned to Sarah, her gaze filled with gratitude. "I don't think I ever imagined that we'd come this far, that Safe Harbor would grow into something so powerful." Sarah nodded, her expression gentle. "It's been an incredible journey, and it all started with you finding the courage to rebuild your life. That courage has carried us here." They sat in silence, their friendship woven with memories of hardship healing, and hope. Together, they had built something that would outlast them, a sanctuary that would continue to serve as a lifeline for women in need. That evening, as they closed the shelter for the night, and Sarah looked back one last time at the space they had created, their hearts filled with pride and peace. Safe Harbor had become a home not only for its residents, but also for them, a place of solace, strength, and boundless possibility. As Ann and Sarah transitioned into advisory roles, they passed the torch to a new generation of leaders, including Maya and other women who had been transformed by Safe Harbor. They watched as their legacy grew, knowing that the shelter was in capable hands and that its mission would continue long after they had stepped back. Years later, a new Safe Harbor was built in a small town on the West Coast, part of the growing network of shelters inspired by Ann and Sarah's vision. At the grand opening, Maya, now the director of Safe Harbor's national programs, gave a speech honoring the women who had started it all. Ann and Sarah taught us that resilience isn't about surviving alone. It's about lifting each other up, about creating a world where every woman feels safe, valued, and empowered, Maya said, her voice filled with emotion. Their courage has given countless women the chance to rebuild, to find hope, and to create lives filled with purpose and possibility. The crowd erupted in applause, and Ann and Sarah, sitting in the front row, exchanged a quiet, knowing smile. They had started as two women searching for healing, and together, they had built something extraordinary. Their legacy would continue to grow, each new shelter a beacon of hope, lighting the way for those in need. Decades after the founding of Safe Harbor, the shelter had become a nationwide network of support centers, each one a symbol of safety, resilience, and empowerment. Ann and Sarah's story had inspired countless women, and their work had sparked a movement that had transformed communities across the country. In a quiet moment in her later years, Ann sat by a window overlooking the garden at Safe Harbor's original location. She watched as a young woman, newly arrived at the shelter, walked through the garden, her expression a mixture of sadness and hope, and saw herself in that young woman, remembering the fear and uncertainty she had once felt. But she also saw something else, a glimmer of strength, a spark that had led so many women to find their way. As she sat there, Sarah joined her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Together, they watched the young woman take her first steps toward healing, each of them filled with a quiet pride. "We did it, Sarah," Ann whispered. "We created something that will continue to help people long after we're gone." Sarah smiled, her eyes misting over as she looked at her dear friend. "We did, and we did it together." Their legacy would endure, carried forward by every woman who walked through Safe Harbor's doors, each one a testament to the strength and compassion that had built this sanctuary. As the years passed, Safe Harbor would remain a place of healing and hope, a shelter for those who needed it most, and a reminder that even the darkest days could give way to a brighter, safer tomorrow. The journey of Safe Harbor was far from over. It would live on in the lives it touched, the women it uplifted, and the communities it transformed, an everlasting tribute to the power of friendship, resilience, and unwavering hope. Thank you for joining us on this journey of hope, resilience, and transformation. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more inspiring narratives like this, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that uplift and empower. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. Stay tuned for more heartfelt tales, and thank you for being part of our community. See you in the next video.